Chapter 28, Surprising Truths. Fighting the fire was so hard that Lena forgot to be afraid. Everything but firefighting was erased from her mind. Her hands reached for the next bucket over and over, and when a warning cry arose, she would look up to see where the danger was and dart out of its way. The water in the barrels soon ran out, and the rear ends of the lines had to move back to scoop water directly from the river, which meant a longer distance for the buckets to travel. The lines snaked left and right, moving to follow the fires, which sprang up in the dry grass like a crop of terrible weeds. In the smoke-dimmed air, people looked like ghosts, swarming every which way, shouting at each other. Once Lena caught sight of Dune, he had jumped into the fountain and was bent over as if fishing with his hand for something at the bottom. He jumped out again, soaking wet, and in the moment the fountain began to overflow and the water spread, running towards the flames in the grass and the plaza's edge. "Oh, Dune, hooray!" Lena thought. She saw Maddie too, several times appearing and disappearing into the swarm of firefighters, sometimes calling out instructions or warnings, sometimes just passing along the buckets, her hair flying in the wind. It was the wind they fought against as much as the fire. It blew in unruly gusts and the flames leaned and stretched before it, reaching for new things to burn. But there were twice as many people fighting the fire now, and before long the people began to win. The flames became flickers put out with a shovelful of dirt or a splash from a bucket, and finally no trace of orange remained in sight. The plaza was a landscape of ashy puddles and smouldering black heaps, looking strangely open without the town hall and the pine tree. Then, for a few moments, people just stood and stared at each other. All of them had smoke-darkened faces and ash-dusted hair and damp, grimy clothes. The people of Ember were just as grubby as the people of Sparks. Everyone looked, more or less, the same. Lena went searching for Dune. She couldn't find him, but she did find Mrs. Murdo sitting on the ground at the north end of the plaza. Her bun had slid all the way off the top of her head and was hanging beneath one ear. Her skirt was dotted with burn holes. "Are you all right?" Lena asked her. "I believe so," Mrs. Murdo said. "And you?" "I'm fine," said Lena. "Yes, you are," said Mrs. Murdo, giving Lena a long look. "Very fine indeed." She held out an arm. "Help me up," she said, "and we'll go back to the doctor's house and get ourselves decent again." When the fire was out and all the firefighters were exhausted and wet and dirty, Dune discovered that his legs felt shaky again, and he went down through the village streets until he found a shady place under a tree where he could sit for a while. People trudged by him, heading for their homes, and the people of Ember passed too, going back to the hotel, which that morning they'd thought they might be leaving forever. Dune didn't call out to anyone. He felt too tired even to talk. He just wanted to rest a minute before facing whatever was going to come next. But he hadn't been sitting there very long before he saw Kenny coming up the road, and when Kenny spotted him, he came over and sat down. "I saw you," he said. "You pulled Torren in from the tree." Dune nodded. "I knew you were that kind of person," Kenny said. Bits of ash sprinkled his blonde hair as if someone had shaken pepper on his head. "What kind?" said Dune. "The brave kind," Kenny said. "The good kind. Not like that other boy." "What other boy?" Kenny leaned back against the trunk of the tree and stretched out his legs. "The one who was yelling for people to fight. That one with the pale eyes." "Tick," said Dune. "Yes, I knew he wasn't a good one, ever since I saw him in the woods that day." "What day?" Dune said. "The day when he was out there with the bags on his hands." Dune turned to stare at Kenny. "Bags? Why? What was he doing?" "Cutting vines," said Kenny. "What kind of vines?" Dune asked. His heart was starting to pound. "Well, I wasn't close to him, I'm not sure, but it was something he didn't want to touch, I guess, like poison oak." "Poison oak? Why would he cut poison oak vines?" "I heard what happened," said Kenny, "about the leaves on the hotel steps. They thought we did it, but I don't think so." Dune's thoughts were racing. He was remembering things. How Tick had an itchy patch on his arm days before the stuff appeared on the hotel steps. How he had led the clean-up but didn't participate himself. How he had smudges on his neck the morning "Go back to your cave" was written on the hotel walls. How he stirred everyone up, fed their anger by reminding them of those 2 attacks over and over again. And as if his mind had been full of clouds but now was clear, he understood. Tick needed all that anger and outrage. The more upset people were, the more of them would want to fight. The more upset people were, the more of them would want to fight. And the more fighters there were, the more people for Tick to lead. Tick wanted power. He wanted glory. He wanted war with himself in command. He had raised his army by attacking his own people. Dune was breathing fast. His hands were cold and shaky. He knew suddenly that this changed everything. It meant that the people of Sparks had not attacked the people of Ember after all. Their fears and suspicions had made them unkind and selfish, but, except maybe for the muddy words in the plaza, they had not attacked. And if there hadn't been the writing on the wall and the poison oak, there probably wouldn't have been the riot in the plaza. And if there hadn't been the riot, the town leaders might not have decided that the Emberites had to leave. Dune jumped to his feet. Startled, Kenny said, "What's the matter?" "You have told me something important," Dune said. He held out a hand and pulled Kenny up. I have to... What did he have to do? He had to talk to someone. He had to explain. "I have to get going," he said to Kenny, and he headed back up the road toward the village centre again, thinking about whom he should talk to and what he should say. The doctor was standing out in front of her house with Poppy at her side when Lena and Mrs. Murdo arrived. Poppy came galloping toward them. "Weena!" she yelled. "I saw Feor! I saw Feor!" "Are you hurt?" Dr. Hester asked. "Just tired," said Lena. "And dirty," said Mrs. Murdo. "Dirty, dirty," said Poppy, tugging at Lena's shirt and trotting along beside her. Torren was sitting on the sofa with his feet in a tub of water. "What happened to you?" asked Lena. "I got burns on my feet," Torren said. "On your feet? How'd you do that?" "You didn't see," said Mrs. Murdo. "See what?" said Lena. So Mrs. Murdo told her. "I don't know why Dune was up in that tower to begin with," she said, "but it was a lucky thing for Torren that he was." Lena raised her eyebrows at Torren. "Dune told me what you said about him. Aren't you ashamed now that he's saved your life?" Torren didn't answer. He stared down at his feet. "You lied," Lena said. "You blamed Dune for something he didn't do." Torren slumped down into the sofa pillows. "He didn't throw those tomatoes," said Lena. "He would never do such a thing. Why did you say he did?" "It was a mistake," said Torren in a muffled voice. "Well, who did it then?" "Someone else." "Who?" "Just someone. I'm not telling." "You are telling." "Something," said Lena. "Maybe you won't tell who did it, but you have to tell that Dune didn't." She shuffled through the clutter on the table and found a scrap of paper. "Here," she said, handing it to Torren with a pencil. "Write on here that you told a lie about Dune. Sign your name." Scowling, Torren wrote. He handed the note to Lena, who headed for the door. "I'm going back to the village," she said. "Just for a little while. I'll be home by dinner time." After dinner that evening, Lena did a lot of talking. Mrs. Murdo and the doctor wanted to know what was out there in the empty lands and how it was to be a roamer and what the city was like. Maddie, sitting on the window seat with a cup of tea, put in a word now and then, but mainly she let Lena tell the story. Torren sat on the couch with his feet stretched out. The doctor had wrapped them in rag bandages and pretended not to listen, but every now and then he couldn't help asking a question. Usually his questions had to do with Caspar. "I don't understand," he said, "why you two came back and not Caspar." "He hadn't finished what he wanted to do," said Lena. "His mission." "What was his mission?" cried Torren. "You must have found out." "We did find out," Lena said. She glanced uncertainly at Maddie. Your brother, said Maddie, is looking for something he will never find. When he realises that, he will come home. But what is he looking for? Torren said. He reared up on his elbows and glared at Maddie. He is looking for a treasure, said Maddie, but he doesn't recognise it even when it's right in front of him. Did he forget his glasses? Torren said. No, but he has trouble seeing even with his glasses on. Lena didn't like Torren any better than she ever had, but she did feel a little sorry for him. So she fetched glasses of honey water for him that evening, and she gave him the little red truck she'd found as a roamer. Poppy seemed to think all this was a kind of party for Torren. She joined in by bringing him things to play with, spoons, socks, potatoes. When it was bedtime, they carried him into the medicine room, and then Lena went with Mrs. Murdo and Poppy up into the loft. Mrs. Murdo unpinned her hair, which fell around her shoulders in strands, clumped together with soot. I have something to say to you, she said to Lena. Lena's heart sank. Whatever it was, she was sure she deserved it. I saw what you did, Mrs. Murdo said. You did a remarkable thing, running out alone like that. Quite courageous. Well, I had to, said Lena. Mrs. Murdo raised her eyebrows questioningly. Lena was too tired to explain about trying to do a good thing to change the direction and how she had hoped that someone else might do it so she wouldn't have to, but nobody did. So she just shrugged her shoulders and said nothing. Mrs. Murdo ran a comb through her hair. I believe a great many of us were thinking of doing the same thing, she said, but no one quite had the courage. Only you. I didn't feel courageous, said Lena. I felt afraid. That makes it all the braver, said Mrs. Murdo. Lena felt a glow, like a little flame inside her. No, not a flame, a light bulb. That was better. A little light bulb was glowing in her heart. I believe I'm more tired than I've ever been in my life, said Mrs. Murdo, and tomorrow there's more to face. Tomorrow? For a moment, Lena couldn't remember what had to be faced tomorrow. Well, yes, said Mrs. Murdo. I suppose tomorrow we'll find out if they're still planning to make us all leave.